Good morning. Our words of welcome today are from the UU minister, Reverend Sharon Wiley. We speak so often of brokenness in religious life. Let us speak today of wholeness. You are welcome here, all of you, every part of you, beautiful, just the way you are. Here, you do not need to be something more or something less. No holding back, no hiding, no exerting yourself, no trying to do more or be more. You have inherent worth and dignity. Nothing to prove here. Nothing to prove to me or other people in this service or to anyone. You don't have to try and be witty or more quiet or more outgoing. You are beautiful. Every part of you beautiful, just the way you are. You do not need to change anything about yourself to be welcome here. Your skin, your hair, your belly, your limbs, your face, all are beautiful just the way they are. You are extraordinary. Each and every one of you different from each and beautiful in your own beautiful way. Breathtaking. Come, let us worship together. And I offer a special welcome to you if you are newly with us this morning. We're honored by your curiosity and presence, and we invite you to stay with us for discussion afterwards. If you'd like any more information about us, please write us at minister@lakechapalauu.org. We'll be happy to answer your questions, inform you about upcoming events, put you on our mailing list if you like. For today's service, we have Roy Haynes presenting alongside me, Kat Barnett and Charlie Jacobs assisting, Michael Reason on piano, and also participating musically remotely, Linda Jessen, Sharon Jarvis, and Michael Reason, and also Richard Clark, Trudy Crippen, and Colleen Berry providing remote tech support. And so I just want to welcome you with live from Fellowship Hall. This is Lake Chapala LCUUF Sunday service. So we do have a few announcements, which will also be posted in my daily emails. The first one is that in almost a month's time, we're going to have a workshop on how we do Sunday services online. We and just every other church has had to make this tremendous shift in the last few months about how we're doing Sundays. And we want to invite more people to be involved in this process. And so we will explore how we're preparing for services and what we've learned in this time, and also what we've learned from other UU churches. And we'll talk about what we need. Some of it, of course, is technical, but a lot of it is non-technical. It's just good old-fashioned preparing something worthwhile to present and presenting it, or being part of the overall service. And we'll talk about some of these things. That's Friday, July 10th, from 2 to 4 p.m. And for all of you early risers, and I'm reminded of this, the LCUUF Monday Women's Discussion Group is at 12 midnight. No. I cannot type. It's at 12 noon on Monday. Contact Catherine Luria or Pam Kusnell for the topic and information about how to access that. And then on Wednesday, we have our community circle. This is at 11 a.m. Central Daylight Time. The Zoom connection is up there. It's the same one it's been for a long time. And then Thursday, we have our women's coffee and chat. They also meet really at noon. And it's the same connection number. Again, we will be mailing these out in the week. And so now let us light our chalice.
Good morning. Our chalice lighting words are by Deanna McDiver. We light this chalice, the symbol of our faith alive in the world. naming our vision of collective liberation, and daring to remember each of us in the beloved community. If you have a challenge you'd like to image on your camera, raise your hand in chat and we will enable your camera. You have to click OK and show your light, and so we can show your lighting of your camera, of your chalice. And there's light in celebration of the lives that we share. It's time for our joys and concerns. Each week we take time to remind ourselves that we are a beloved, or belong to a beloved community which cares for each other. We do this by sharing any significant joys or sorrows in our life. Please, if you have a joy or sorrow to share today, you can also type them into chat and we will try to read them aloud. I have one sorrow right now. Let me read this little thing before I do that. Let us recall certain sorrows or concerns, whatever you have in the world been holding that is needed of healing and caring thoughts. You are welcome to type it in the chat box and we will try to read it. Well, the concern that I have right now is Greenville, South Carolina is become one of the hot spots for the coronavirus. My daughter lives there, David and I's daughter lives there, and they have been increasing a total of 500 new cases a day in the last week. So she's a little bit concerned, and we have lots of friends, so we're sending out good thoughts to those that are in Greenville, South Carolina. Kat, do we have any more sorrows?
Pamela Cousinel is concerned about her old friend Larissa suffering from COVID with her mother in Russia. From Fred, sorrow for the youths being abducted, disappeared in our lakeside communities. I'm not sure if this is a joy or a sorrow, probably a joy. From Dee Dee and Larry, we're in Massachusetts for the summer. Quiet here.
Okay, let us now begin by recalling the joys, whatever you may be celebrating, whatever invokes a feeling of joy and peace in yourself and others. Do we have any joys?
We have one from Colleen Berry. The younger generation stepping up to change the world and make it a better place. My nieces, Nicole and Chelsea, are participating in many demonstrations to support Black Lives Matter.
All right, at this time we will light our care candle. This is a candle provided by the care team, which represents the sorrows that are too raw, too difficult for people to share aloud. We light this candle for those sorrows that remain silent, but present and unspoken in our hearts.
You're on, Monica. Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, so I can start. Okay. This is by Reverend D. Scott Cooper. We come together in order to imagine not one path, but many. We imagine a path forward for those who cannot imagine any path forward because of poor health, financial hardship, family crises, and other roadblocks we cannot begin to understand or imagine. We struggle to imagine a path forward for those who are forced to leave a homeland against their will, and for those unable to leave a war-torn homeland despite their lives being in danger. We imagine a path forward for those who leave their homes to make a better life for their families elsewhere. May we be a welcoming presence along that path toward hope. We imagine a path forward for those who have faced lives of oppression anywhere, as well as a path forward for those who out of fear or greed have created their oppression. We come together to imagine a path forward for those of us despairing because we do not seem to know our country nor our neighbors, despite the fact that we have not moved at all. May we be the good we are hoping to find as we travel side by side down the path toward hope. We imagine a path forward for those who feel lonely. May we be together with each other as we walk that path toward community. Truly, we know as we imagine these ways forward, the paths will lead to hope. The roads will lead to beloved community. And the arc will bend toward justice because we have dared to travel with love in our hearts. May we travel forward on these paths that we imagine.
These have been challenging times these few weeks. Well, they've been challenging for a longer time. And part of what we might do to survive and thrive in times like these is to find the place of calm within ourselves. And for many of us who meditate regularly, that often starts with the breath. That sense of being able to just take in a deep breath and let it out slowly. And just observe our body as it finds a sense of calm with each deep breath. Inhale, finding calmness, and as we exhale, finding even more calmness. Inhale, exhale, slowly. You may find that as you do this, you might even get a little lightheaded. And if that happens, just pause and notice your body. Notice that even in that pause, you find deeper calmness. So let's just take a few more moments of these deep, sustaining, calming breaths.
This is a personal reflection I have on racism. As I have sat in my home here in Mexico over the past few weeks, watching the horrible events unfold in the US surrounding racism, I have been forced to do some real soul searching on how I fit into the conversation and how I have been impacted by this thing called systemic racism throughout my life. The fact is, I am a product of systemic racism. I was born in a small town in Tennessee, college educated in Kentucky, and spent 26 years of my working career in South Carolina. I am very aware of the importance race plays on everyday life in the South. Recently, I wrote a Facebook post to my fellow Black brothers and sisters about not letting racism and white supremacy define you. In some crazy ways, both have pushed me to strive to be better and achieve more. At an early age, I knew the only opportunity that I was going to have to require me to rise above my skin color through hard work. Easier said than done. You see, racism comes in all forms. Being a gay person of color in the Deep South added double pressure for me to strive for excellence. During some points in my life, I didn't fit in anywhere. In the Black community, there's also racism. Light skin versus dark skin, speaking in slang versus speaking in proper English, and homophobia, seen as being weak or trying to be white. Those things can be as damaging as white supremacy and racism from whites. In my youth, being gay in the Black community was not embraced. So I didn't have the comfort of friends from the Black community. I would get things like, "You don't sound or act Black. Are you trying to be white? You are such a sissy." Even though I was somewhat intelligent, outgoing, and articulate, I didn't fit into the white community either because of the color of my skin. I found myself floating between these two communities, not fully being accepted by either. My mother instilled in me to always give 100%, if not more, in everything that I did. Even though I might not get praise or credit for it, she believed in hard work and did not believe in a handout from the man. I'm sure my mother and grandmother worried about my safety sometimes because I was usually the token Black surrounded by whites in most situations. Even this fear was a reality. She always pushed me to seek opportunities that would ensure I would have a better life than she did. We were poor and probably could have received government assistance, but she refused, choosing to work long hours at a local manufacturing plant for the money she earned. Somehow she managed to make the ends meet, and I never wanted for anything. My mother and grandmother were products of the Great Depression, the Jim Crow South, and systemic racism, but had a strong work ethic that they passed along to me. This resulted in me being the first person in my family to go to college and receive both a BS and an MS degrees. I've only faced racism blatantly a couple of times in my life. The first time was my freshman year of college. In the fall of 1983, I was selected drum major of the Murray State University Racer Band. I was the first Black person, male or female, to hold that position. It was very rare for a freshman to be selected. It was a huge but scary honor for me. There were only 3 of us, me plus 2 white girls. The Murray State Band had always had 3 drum majors, 1 guy, 2 girls. Until I was drum major, the previous 10-year tradition was the male drum major to escort the 2 female drum majors onto the football field, holding their hands while marching down the 50-yard line all together. That year, the band director decided to change that tradition. I entered the field marching down the 50-yard line alone. My 2 fellow female drum majors entered the field marching down the 45-yard lines. We were not allowed to be within 5 yards of each other at any given point during the performance. It was such an honor for me to be in that position that I did not dare say anything, but others definitely did. The band director did not change his mind until my junior year when a new female drum major was selected who happened to be Black. He decided that he wanted us to go back to the way we used to enter the field. I guess it's okay for me to hold one white girl's hand as long as it's not two. I did not let this situation define me. Instead, I channeled the energy to make certain that my performances on the field all 4 years of my college were the best the audience had ever seen. It is true that a Black person needs to be 10 times better to be considered equal to their white counterparts. The bar is definitely set high. The second time that I faced racism was in the workplace. Before I retired in 2019, I worked for 25 and a half years for a Southern department store chain called Belt. The majority of those years, I was an executive regional visual manager. This meant that I had people to supervise who did not want to take directions from a younger, gay Black man. They got over the gay part for the most part because the majority of the executives were gay. But the Black thing, that was a different story. I'm lost again. For many years, I was the only Black executive RVM, which added to the pressure that I put on myself to be the very best. Hearing statements like, who the hell does he think he is? Why does Beck have some Black or Indian person from India in this managerial position? I guess I didn't look Black to everyone, but I was still a person of color and I was discriminated. Or why is a Black person in this position? It must be affirmative action. My mother always told me not to ask something of somebody that I was not willing to do myself. This philosophy always was singing in the back of my mind. I had a problem delegating tasks and projects simply because I thought I needed to prove that I was willing to do whatever I asked of people to be respected, accepted, and not to be seen as lazy, as many Black people are stereotyped as being. Some of the store managers and associates I directed throughout the years really had a problem with me telling them what to do. Nothing was ever said to me directly, but I knew it was because I was Black. It was definitely not because of my job performance. People of color become quite good at reading between the lines and seeing subtle looks of disapproval that you receive. I was always given more than some of my fellow executives. Some of my fellow executives were just plain lazy, always delegating their duties to others and taking credit for the work as their own. And they got away with it, mainly because their skin was white. I never let the effects of racism on the quality of the job I did. I would like to think I paved the road for many Black managers to follow. I know that I'm one of the lucky people of color who has never been harassed by the police or held back in my career. I just had to prove that I was worthy as my white counterparts every day. I do know these things. Always, always let the content of your character define you. The first steps in healing is telling your story and listen to other stories. There are many conversations that need to be had, peaceful protests to attend, much love to be extended and received, and more work on the subjects surrounding systemic racism through the world. Systemic racism has been baked into our society over hundreds of years. It comes from a place of fear and loss of power. People are afraid of what they don't know. My hope is that we all can come to the discussion table with open hearts, open mind, and a willingness to provoke change. This is what's needed to begin real healing and racism reform. Now we have this little 4-minute video that talks about systemic racism.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin, who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and get accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start, so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
This is from UU Minister, the Reverend Ellen Quadgrass. A prayer for white people in the wake of George Floyd's death. Sheltered in our homes or going to work at risk for week after week after week, we're edgy, tired, a little raw, we're tender, vulnerable, open, a little more open than usual. Those of us who are white, who before might have been distracted, who before might have been too busy, who before might have been preoccupied with our lives, are seeing the ways injustices happen to people of color the same way, again and again and again. Now we see. Please may we see. May we not unsee. May we not go get distracted. May we not turn away. May we see, really see. May we open, really open. May we accept the invitation to change, really change our minds, our hearts, our world. When we see calls to defund the police, when we see calls for reparations, when we follow our lead from people, may we listen, may we learn, may we be open. May we be open. Even if it means rethinking everything you thought you knew about the world, we stand together, all of us as humans, with an enormous opportunity to change one of the oldest injustices in history. To change everything. May we stay vulnerable. May we stay tender. May we take action. Eyes and hearts and minds open. Amen.
When I was a kid growing up in the South, we were taught that by the time of the Civil War, slavery was a dying institution, economically unprofitable and destined to fade away on its own, had the North not foolishly intervened in an unnecessary and bloody violence of the Civil War. I came to understand that the truth was far different. That childhood story is known as the lost cause myth, and the truth is far more disturbing. You see, slavery is central to the history and success of the American project. Before the war, cotton was America's most valuable export. Slavery was America's most valuable enterprise. According to Yale historian David W. Blight, slaves were the single largest, by far, financial asset of property in the entire American economy. Before the Civil War, the only thing more valuable than slaves was the land itself. So the USA was born and came to its age on the backs of slave bodies. Slavery runs through its laws and culture. White supremacy was its founding principle. Consider the peculiar organization of the Electoral College was created to protect the interests of slave states. And the Second Amendment was written primarily to allow slaveholders and slave state militias to suppress slave attempts for freedom. And that the science of time and motion studies and efficiency experts had their origin in getting the maximum output out of slave bodies. And the system of debt financing that developed into home mortgages was developed in part to allow Southern slave owners to mortgage their slaves to Northern bankers so they could buy more slaves. And even after emancipation, laws against trespassing and vagrancy were passed to limit the freedom of mobility of former slaves. And as time passed, the system of systemic slavery evolved into a system of systemic racism. So that, for example, the USA's system of Social Security initially excluded farm workers and maids, who represented 2/3 of Black workers in the South at the time. And city planners often used their federally funded money to build interstate highways on top of Black and minority neighborhoods, dividing or destroying them. And as white people fled to the suburbs of cities, They block the development of mass transit to those suburbs. We have systemic racism to thank for our long commutes. And that the Federal Housing Administration conspired to limit home mortgages in neighborhoods populated with Blacks, instead preferentially funding white neighborhoods, as we saw in the video. And the war on drugs and the consequential mass incarceration of people of color is less motivated by an increase in violent crime as a deliberate effort to push back the gains of the civil rights movement. And as we see today, a culture of tolerance for police violence against Black people has been endorsed at the highest levels of government, including the Supreme Court. But I, and I think most of us, learned little of this in school. These are the dark secrets buried in the heart of America. As a country, we've been unwilling, even oppositional, to examine and reflect on this history. In the psychology developed by Carl Jung, the shadow is that part of our personality, often unconscious, that our conscious ego does not identify with. The shadow is largely hidden. It is the rejected part, and it is often negative. In psychotherapy or other self-examination, one tries to become aware of one's shadow qualities, to bring them to light. So in my own work, I realized that one of my shadows was a fear that people would not like me for who I was, but only because of what I did. And this led to overwork or workaholism in my past. Can a nation have a shadow side? Carl Jung called the shadow shared by an organization or a nation the collective shadow. And psychology professor David Kleinis tells us that this unexamined collective shadow can be very dangerous. He offers an example. The collective shadow was very prominent in German culture during the time of Hitler. The German people had been through a humiliating defeat in World War I and were going through a period of devastating depression. Their collective sense of inferiority relative to the rest of the world was a powerful influencing factor in the rise of Nazism. Hitler, the little corporal, merely represented this deep sense of inferiority, which sought compensation through a quest for power. Could racism, and more specifically white supremacy, be a collective shadow quality in the USA today? I mean, race issues seem to be at the forefront right now. When I was at the Unitarian Universalist Association General Assembly a few years ago, I got a chance to hear the acclaimed public interest lawyer, Brian Stevenson, speak. He said, "I don't think the great evil of American slavery is involuntary servitude or forced labor. I believe the great evil of American slavery was the narrative of racial difference that we created to legitimate enslavement. We wanted to feel moral and just and Christian while we owned other people. So we made up this narrative that Black people are different than white people, that they can't do this, they can't do that, they're not fully human, they're not evolved, this ideology of white supremacy that was the true evil of American slavery. It is this narrative that I, Matt, believes leads to a fundamental disease in the core, at the heart of the United States. It is a cultural unwillingness to examine the narrative, an unwillingness to go into collective therapy, if you will, that prevents the USA as a nation from being at peace. And it's apparent to outsiders. Stevenson compared the USA to other nations with difficult histories, saying this: if you go to South Africa, they will make you hear about the history of apartheid. If you go to Rwanda, they will make you understand the damage done by the genocide. If you go to Berlin, Germany today, you can't go 100 meters without seeing a marker or a stone that's placed next to the homes of Jewish families lost during the Holocaust. The Germans want you to go to the Holocaust Memorial. But in this country, we don't talk about the genocide. We don't talk about slavery. We don't talk about lynching. We don't talk about segregation. And we're not going to get to where we need to go until we talk about it. And changing the narrative, I believe, is essential. I, Matt, believe that's what's happening now. A questioning of the narrative of white supremacy, an illumination of all the forms in which systemic racism manifests in the culture of the USA. It is hard work. In a therapist's office, the shadow work often involves a lot of emotions, a lot of tears, maybe even screaming. It's not work we want to do. And in the USA right now, we're seeing this collective work as painful too. Life-risking, sometimes violent, work that many people just wish would go away. And yet we do it because we must, because we hope for a better nation and a better world that will emerge from it. What can you and I do? Now, I'm most directly talking to white-skinned folks from the USA, but these points might apply to others, white-skinned and people of color in other countries as well. We start by noticing, really seeing and paying attention to the shadow of racism. Don't get distracted, for the shadows drive strong emotions. For many progressive folks, we can feel guilt and shame as we learn about systemic racism, and we realize that we benefit from the system whether or not we support it. The guilt can drive us to freeze up so that we don't know how to respond or take action. People on both sides may feel anger. For those embedded in the white supremacy culture, the anger is often driven by fear, the fear of a loss of a way of life or power or control. We progressives can also feel anger as we realize how corrupt the system is and how we've been lied to. But by recognizing and dealing with these emotions, we will be much more effective in our actions. By recognizing the emotions of those on the other side, we can be more effective in communicating with them. As white people, we can certainly protest, and we can certainly fund the work for change. We can be allies to our friends who are people of color, following their lead, for they are at the center of this work, as well they should be. But our most effective role may be to work to help other white people see the shadow of racism in our culture. Many such ordinary white people are just now becoming aware, just now waking up, ready to listen. We can offer our stories, help them reframe their narrative so that they can begin to side with us in anti-racism and anti-oppression work. We can help other people see. We can help them see the shadow that has hung over the land, over the culture, essentially from the very beginning. We can help them see their part, working with us to expose and cancel racism and white supremacy culture in our society. And so all of us, whatever color, whatever nationality, can imagine paths forward, paths that will lead to the beloved community with the arc bending towards justice for everyone, all of us, no one excluded. May we travel forward on these paths that we imagine. Blessed be. Our hymn is number 169, We Shall Overcome. For this hymn, Michael was able to do his magic of joining together several of our voices over the wires, Linda Jessen, Sharon Jarvis, and Michael Reason. Please join them in singing.
We shall overcome.
It's time for us to extinguish the chalice with these words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth or the warmth of community or the fire of commitment. These we keep in our hearts and share with all the world.
We'll have our postlude now and then closing words. The work of anti-racism is challenging work. We both have to do our own work wherever we are, becoming aware of the shadow of racism. But we also have to work together because of the enormity of the task in the United States and in the world. So to remind ourselves of that, let us do the ritual of holding hands. I invite you to turn your camera on and select gallery view so you can see a lot of people. And now put your hands up like this and kind of touch the edge of your box. And let's say these words together. Repeat after me. I put my hands in yours so that together we may do what we cannot do alone. Blessed be.